The sweet and sour smell of Kung Pao chicken filled the air as Mai hustled between tables at the Golden Walk. Her feet ached in her worn-out shoes, but her smile never wavered. That's what 12 years of waiting tables does to you. It teaches you to smile through anything. The lunch rush was in full swing, and the clinking of plates mixed with the steady hum of customer chatter. "Order up," called Mr. Liu from the kitchen window. May grabbed the steaming plates of food, balancing them expertly along her arms. She'd gotten so good at this that she could probably do it blindfolded. Though right now, she was more focused on remembering the joke that had just popped into her head about fortune cookies and life choices. Between refilling water glasses and dropping off check holders, Mai would sneak quick moments to jot down ideas in her little notepad. Most waitresses use their notepads just for orders, but May's was different. Hidden between scribbles of extra spicy and no peanuts were fragments of comedy gold. At least, that's what she hoped they were. The regulars loved her. There was the old man who came in every Tuesday for the lunch special, and May always had a new joke ready for him. Today's was about how his favorite hot and sour soup was like Chinese penicillin. It wasn't her best material, but it made him laugh so hard he nearly choked on his water. During the afternoon lull, Mai sat at the empty bar, counting her tips while the other servers gossiped about customers. She half listened, adding her own funny observations now and then, but her mind was elsewhere. Tonight was another open mic night at the Rusty Nail, a dive bar 10 blocks away. The kind of place where the stage was just a corner with slightly better lighting, and the audience consisted mainly of other aspiring comedians waiting for their turn. Last week, only 3 people had watched her perform, and one of them was scrolling through their phone the entire time. But Mai kept going back, week after week, testing new material, learning what worked and what didn't. She'd started recording herself on her phone, watching the videos back at night after her shift, critiquing every word, every pause, every gesture. Her mother didn't understand it. "Why you want to tell jokes to strangers?" she'd ask during their weekly phone calls. "Restaurant business is stable. One day you can own your own place." But Maya couldn't explain that while she loved the restaurant and its people, her heart came alive when she was on stage, even if that stage was just a wooden box in a bar that smelled like stale beer. As the dinner rush approached, May tucked her comedy notepad back into her apron pocket. Mr. Liu was calling out orders again, and a group of 8 had just walked in. She straightened her name tag, took a deep breath, and walked toward their table. In her head, she was already turning their inevitable complicated orders into material for her next set. "Welcome to Golden Walk," she said brightly, pulling out her order pad. "Can I interest you in our house special today?" As she spoke, she noticed one of them wearing a t-shirt with a hilarious typo. That was definitely going in her notebook later. Even now, as she took their orders, she was mentally writing her next routine. Because that's the thing about being a waitress with dreams of stand-up stardom. Every customer was potential material, every interaction a possible punchline. The dinner rush would keep her running for the next few hours, but at 10 p.m., she'd change out of her work clothes, grab her notebook, and head to the Rusty Nail. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight someone would really listen. Maybe tonight would be the night her jokes landed just right, and she'd feel that spark, that connection with the audience that she'd been chasing all these months. But for now, there were orders to take, tables to clean, and fortune cookies to deliver. And somewhere between the sweet and sour chicken and the Kung Pao shrimp, May was crafting her next 5 minutes of material, one customer interaction at a time. It started like any other Tuesday at the Golden Walk. The lunch rush was winding down, and Mai had just finished wiping down a table when they walked in. A group of 6 wearing expensive suits and self-importance like cologne. She could tell right away they were the type who thought their corporate credit cards made them royalty. "Just a moment while I clean this table for you," Mai said with her usual smile, quickly gathering the last few dishes. One of them, A man with a Bluetooth earpiece permanently attached to his head loudly sighed and checked his watch. They barely looked at her while ordering, too busy typing on their phones. The Bluetooth man barked his order without even glancing up. Gluten-free lo mein, no MSG, extra spicy, but not too spicy, and make it quick. Mi's pen paused over her notepad. Sir, lo mein noodles contain gluten. I can suggest some rice-based dishes instead. Listen. He cut her off, finally looking up with the kind of stare that could freeze hot soup. I come to Chinese restaurants all the time. Just tell your cook to make it gluten-free. His colleagues shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Mai tried again, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Sir, it's not possible to make lo mein gluten-free because the noodles. Are you really arguing with me? His voice rose sharply, drawing attention from nearby tables. I want gluten-free lo mein. Is that too complicated for you to understand? Each word felt like a slap. The restaurant had gone quiet. Even the usual clattering from the kitchen had stopped. Mai felt everyone's eyes on her, watching, waiting. Her throat tightened, and to her horror, she felt tears beginning to form. 6 years of dealing with difficult customers, and this was the one that would break her. Mr. Liu appeared from the kitchen, his usually cheerful face serious. Is there problem here? Before he could say more, Mai turned and walked quickly toward the back, past the kitchen, through the storage room, and out the back door into the alley. The cold air hit her face as tears finally spilled over. She leaned against the brick wall, her notepad clutched to her chest, breathing in the smell of garbage and rain. Typical Seattle afternoon. But something strange happened as she stood there. Through her tears, she started to laugh. Not a happy laugh, exactly, but the kind that comes when life gets so absurd you can't help it. She pulled out her notepad and began to write. Dear gluten-free lo mein guy, she muttered as she scribbled. Thank you for being the perfect example of every entitled customer ever. The words flowed faster than her tears had. Every ridiculous demand, every condescending tone, every impossible request she'd ever received, they all came pouring out. 20 minutes later, Mai had 6 pages of raw, honest, and surprisingly funny material. Her hands were smudged with ink and her eyes were still red, but she felt lighter somehow. This wasn't just another funny story about restaurant life. This was truth wrapped in humor, the kind that could make people laugh while making them think. When she finally went back inside, Mr. Liu was waiting. You okay? He asked, genuine concern in his eyes. The difficult customer and his group were gone, their table now occupied by a friendly elderly couple who always tipped well. I'm okay, Mai said, and for the first time that day, her smile was real. Actually, I'm better than okay. She patted her notepad, now full of what she knew would become her best material yet. That night, after her shift, Mai didn't go straight to the Rusty Nail as usual. Instead, she sat in a nearby coffee shop, refining and rehearsing her new routine. She practiced until the barista started stacking chairs, turning one customer's cruelty into 5 minutes of comedy that felt different from anything she'd written before. This wasn't just funny. It was real, it was raw, and it was relatable. As she finally headed home, walking past puddles reflecting neon signs, Mai realized something. Sometimes the worst moments make the best material. That customer hadn't just ruined her day. He'd accidentally given her a gift. Tomorrow, she'd be back at Golden Walk, wearing her name tag and carrying her notepad. But now she had something else too. A voice that was truly her own, just waiting to be heard. The flyer caught Mai's eye during her break. It was pinned to the coffee shop bulletin board, bright yellow paper between ads for guitar lessons and lost cats. Seattle Comedy Competition, $10,000 grand prize. Her heart skipped a beat as she read further. Industry judges, talent scouts, and a chance to perform at the historic Moore Theater. She unpinned the flyer with trembling fingers and sat down at her usual corner table. The entry fee was $200, exactly what she'd been saving for new work shoes. Her current pairs were so worn that she could feel every crack in the restaurant's tile floor. But something about this felt different from all the other competitions she'd seen advertised before. "Your usual?" asked the barista, already preparing her green tea. "Thanks, Lynn," Matt replied, still staring at the flyer. "Have you ever wanted something so badly it scared you?" Lynn placed the steaming cup on her table and glanced at the paper. "Is this about your comedy thing?" She was one of the few people who knew about Me's late-night performances. "You should do it. You're way funnier than those guys I see at the Rusty Nail." Mai pulled out her phone and checked her bank account. The numbers stared back at her. $243.17. Just enough for the entry fee and bus fare for the next week. Her practical side screamed that this was crazy. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Save money, be smart, don't take risks." But then she remembered last night's performance at the Rusty Nail. She tried out her new material at the gluten-free lo mein incident. For the first time, the entire room had actually listened. Even the bartender had stopped wiping glasses to hear the ending. The laughter hadn't been polite or scattered. It had been real, genuine, the kind that comes from recognition and truth. "I've got 15 minutes left on my break," Mai said, pulling out her laptop. "Help me fill out this application." Lynn pulled up a chair, and together they crafted her entry. Under Performance Experience, Mai listed every open mic night, every kitchen party where she'd made the staff laugh, every moment she'd turned customer service disasters into comedy gold. It wasn't much, but it was honest. Her finger hovered over the submit button. $200. That was 40 hours of carrying plates, refilling water glasses, and explaining that no, they couldn't make the Kung Pao chicken without peanuts. It was a month of wearing shoes that made her feet scream by the end of each shift. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Liu asking if she could cover an extra shift tonight. The universe giving her a sign. She looked down at her worn-out shoes, then back at the competition flyer with its promise of something more. "Just do it," Lynn urged, pushing her own tip money across the table. "Pay me back when you win." Mai pushed the money back with a smile. "No, I need to do this myself." She took a deep breath and clicked Submit. The confirmation page appeared instantly, making it all real. She had exactly 3 weeks to prepare. Walking back to the restaurant, she felt lighter despite her aching feet. She'd spent 6 years serving other people's dreams on a platter, sweet and sour chicken, Kung Pao shrimp, impossible requests with a side of smile. Maybe it was time to serve up something of her own. That evening, as she cleared tables and took orders, every customer interaction felt different. The businessman who complained his rice was too white, the teenager who tried to pay for a $30 meal with a $5 bill, the couple who couldn't agree on whether their soup was too hot or too cold. They weren't just customers anymore. They were material possibilities, stories waiting to be told. After her shift, Mai sat at the empty bar counting her tips as usual. But this time, instead of setting aside money for new shoes, she started a different list in her notepad. Things to buy for first real performance. A new notebook. A decent outfit. Maybe even a small voice recorder to help her practice. Mr. Liu came out from the kitchen, catching her scribbling in her notepad. "Always writing," he said with a knowing smile. "Maybe someday you tell my story too." "Maybe," Matt replied, realizing she'd never seen him as a character before. "But first, I need to tell my own." The preliminary rounds of the competition were 2 weeks away, and Mi's life had become a careful balancing act. She turned her service station at the Golden Walk into a secret rehearsal space, practicing punchlines while refilling soy sauce bottles. The kitchen staff had gotten used to her muttering to herself while rolling silverware, testing different ways to deliver her jokes. Table 6 needs more napkins, she whispered to herself one busy Thursday, just like my mother needs me to get a real job. She tried the line again with different emphasis, keeping track of which versions made the busboy laugh as he passed by. Her regular customers started noticing changes. The way she paused slightly before delivering their fortune cookies, testing new timing. How she'd sometimes pull out her phone to record a quick note between orders. Even her walk had changed. There was a hint of stage presence in how she carried herself now, like she was always halfway between the dining room and a spotlight. The first preliminary round had gone surprisingly well. The judges had laughed at her bit about fortune cookies predicting customer complaints. She'd made it through to the next round, but that's when things started getting complicated. Mr. Liu called from the kitchen. Order mixing up again. Customers say you bring wrong dish 3 times. She snapped back to reality, realizing she'd been running through her routine in her head instead of focusing on orders. The notepad in her apron pocket was now filled with more joke ideas than food orders, and it was starting to show. That afternoon, during the slow period between lunch and dinner, she sat at an empty table trying to practice while rolling napkins. Her new material about cultural expectations was still rough. She needed to find the right balance between funny and honest. When you finish napkins, Mr. Liu said, appearing beside her, we talk. 20 minutes later, she sat in his small office, surrounded by invoices and family photos. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. 6 years you work here, he began, his face serious but kind. Best server I ever have. But lately, he gestured at a stack of customer complaints. Mine always somewhere else. Mi's stomach tightened. She couldn't lose this job. Not now. Not when she was so close. I'm sorry, Mr. Liu. I'll do better. I promise. He held up her comedy notepad. She'd left it on the counter earlier. This your dream? He asked, surprisingly gentle. She nodded, fighting back tears. The competition. It could change everything. But I need this job. I need both, just for a little while longer. Mr. Liu was quiet for a long moment, looking at the photos on his wall. Finally, he spoke. When I come to America, everyone say restaurant business too risky. But I have dream. He handed her back the notepad. You work here 3 years before tell anyone about comedy. Why so afraid? The question caught her off guard. Because, she started, then stopped. Because what if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? You already fail if never try, he said simply. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Tomorrow you work lunch only. Evening you practice. But, he held up one finger. No more mixing orders. No more wrong dishes. When you here, be here. When you there, be there. Understand? May nodded, clutching her notepad. Thank you, Mr. Liu. I won't let you down. That night, after her shortened shift, she went to a small coffee shop to practice. Her next preliminary round was in 3 days. As she rehearsed, she thought about Mr. Liu's words. She'd spent so long being afraid to fully commit to either world, always a waitress dreaming of comedy, or a comedian playing it safe with a steady job. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. Preliminary round 3, Saturday night. The same night as the restaurant's busy anniversary celebration. She'd have to find someone to cover her shift, but for the first time, she didn't feel guilty about choosing her dream over her safety net. She opened her notepad to a fresh page and wrote at the top, the secret to good service is a lot like good comedy. It's all about timing. Below it, she started planning how to tell Mr. Liu she needed Saturday night off, turning even this moment into material for her growing routine. The backstage area of the comedy club buzzed with nervous energy. May paced in the narrow hallway, running through her routine one last time. She'd made it to the semifinals, surprising everyone, including herself. Tonight's crowd was different from the usual open mic nights. Industry people, real judges, even a few local celebrities. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Probably another good luck text from the restaurant staff. They'd been sending them all day. But when she checked the screen, her heart stopped. 3 missed calls from her little brother and 1 message. Come to First Hill Hospital. Dad collapsed at work. The world seemed to tilt sideways. She could hear the current performer on stage getting big laughs. The 5-minute warning call from the stage manager. Her father had been pushing himself too hard lately, taking extra shifts at his construction job, but he refused to slow down. You're on in 5, the stage manager said, poking his head around the corner. Mi's hands shook as she tried to call her brother back. No answer. She texted, "At comedy competition. How serious is it? Should I come now?" The reply came quickly. He's stable. Doctors say exhaustion and dehydration. He's asking for you. Another update from the stage manager. 3 minutes. Mi leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. Her father had never approved of her comedy dreams. Waste of time, he'd say. Focus on real work. She'd stopped telling him about her performances months ago. He didn't even know about the competition. 1 minute. She made her decision. Straightening her jacket, she walked toward the stage. The lights felt hotter than usual, and the audience was a blur of faces. Her mouth was dry as she took the microphone. "So, my father," she began, her voice shaky. Then she stopped. The rehearsed routine felt wrong. Empty. False. In that moment, looking out at the expectant crowd, she did something she'd never done before. She told the truth. "My father collapsed today," she said quietly. The audience went silent. "He's in the hospital right now, probably wondering where his daughter is. And I'm here, telling jokes to strangers." She took a deep breath. You know what's funny? Not funny haha, but funny strange. In Chinese, the word for success sounds a lot like the word for filial piety. Respect for your parents. Maybe that's why every Asian kid grows up feeling like success and family duty are the same thing. The audience leaned in. This wasn't her planned routine of cultural differences in restaurants. This was raw, real, happening right now. My dad works construction, 12-hour days in the sun. When I was little, he'd come home with concrete dust in his hair, but he'd still help me with my English homework. He wanted me to have an office job, something safe. Instead, I became a waitress who tells jokes at night. She found her rhythm, weaving together stories about her father's sacrifices, her own dreams, and the constant tug-of-war between duty and desire. The laughter came naturally, not from clever punchlines, but from truth that hit home. The worst part is, she continued, he doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm working late at the restaurant, which means either I'm a terrible daughter for being here, or I'm an amazing waitress who can be in 2 places at once. When her time was up, the applause felt different. Not polite, not professional, real. As she left the stage, the judges' scores were the last thing on her mind. She grabbed her bag and ran for the door, already looking up bus routes to the hospital. She found her father in a small room, looking smaller than she'd ever seen him in the hospital bed. Her brother dozed in a chair nearby. Her father's eyes opened as she entered. "Where you been?" he asked in Mandarin, his voice weak but stern. May took his hand and did something else she'd never done before. She told him everything. About the competition. About her dreams. About being torn between 2 worlds. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "You make people laugh." She nodded. "Good ones laugh? Not just pity laugh." "Good ones," she confirmed, surprised to see a hint of a smile on his face. He squeezed her hand weakly. "Tell me one joke. Make it good." 2 days after her father came home from the hospital, Mai stood in the Golden Walk's kitchen, her hands trembling as she untied her apron for the last time. The morning sun streamed through the windows, making the usual cooking steam look like golden clouds. Mr. Liu watched her with a mixture of pride and sadness as she folded the apron carefully. "You sure about this?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. "The finals are in 3 weeks," Mai replied, placing the folded apron on the counter. "I need to give it everything I have. No more double life." The news of her semifinal performance had spread through the local comedy scene. Despite running off stage to the hospital that night, or maybe because of it, she'd earned her highest scores yet. The judges had called her performance raw, authentic, and unforgettable. Her father's words from his hospital bed still echoed in her mind. "I spend whole life being safe, so you can take risks. Don't waste that." Coming from a man who had once called comedy a waste of time, those words meant everything. The kitchen staff gathered around as she prepared to leave. The cook who always sneaked her extra dumplings, the dishwasher who laughed at her practice routines, the new waitress who looked up to her. They'd become more than coworkers over the years. "Wait," Mr. Liu said, disappearing into his office. He returned with a small box. Open. Inside was a new notebook, bound in red leather. On the cover, in gold letters, "From your first stage." Mai felt tears forming, but laughed instead. "You know what's funny? I always thought this restaurant was keeping me from my dreams. Turns out, it was getting me material the whole time." Little did she know, her restaurant family had been busy. While she'd been at the hospital with her father, they'd been spreading the word about her upcoming finals performance. They'd posted flyers, told regular customers, even created a social media page. The Golden Walk was becoming her unofficial fan club headquarters. That afternoon, Maya sat in her tiny apartment, surrounded by years of notes, napkins, and order pads covered in joke ideas. Her father sat in her only chair, still recovering but insistent on helping. They were sorting through stories, finding the thread that connected them all. "Tell the one about customer who tried to pay with garden vegetables," her father suggested, surprising her with his interest. "But maybe don't tell about time I yell at you for getting B in math." She smiled, adding another note to her growing outline. Her final routine was taking shape, not just jokes about restaurant life, but a story about family, dreams, and the courage to choose between serving other people's expectations and your own ambitions. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of rehearsals and rewrites. She practiced everywhere, in front of her mirror, at small clubs, even at her father's physical therapy sessions, where the other patients became her test audience. Her old restaurant regulars would stop by these practice sessions, ordering nothing but staying for hours to watch her work on her material. The day before the finals, she visited the Golden Walk one last time. The place was buzzing with excitement. Mr. Liu had changed the specials board to read, "Tomorrow night. Watch our own Maya at the Moore Theater." Regular customers were booking tables just to talk about how they'd known her when. As she looked around the restaurant that had been her stage for so many years, May realized something. She wasn't leaving her old life behind. She was taking it with her. Every customer interaction, every family argument, every moment of doubt and triumph had led to this. That evening, she sat with her father, showing him her final routine. He listened carefully, occasionally suggesting tweaks to her Chinese pronunciation when she mixed languages for effect. "Tomorrow," he said, "I sit front row. First time I see you perform." "You should rest at home," she protested. "The doctors said." He waved her off with a familiar stubbornness. 6 years, I don't watch you tell jokes. No more wasting time." As she walked home that night, her new red notebook tucked under her arm, Mai felt ready. Not just for the competition, but for whatever came after. She'd finally found her voice. It just happened to have a Chinese accent and smell faintly of Kung Pao chicken. The historic Moore Theater buzzed with anticipation. Backstage, Mai peeked through the curtain at the filling seats. Her former restaurant coworkers had taken up an entire row, wearing matching Golden Walk t-shirts they'd made specially for tonight. Mr. Liu sat among them, beaming with pride. Her father occupied his promised front row seat, looking tired but determined, her brother beside him with a supportive smile. Her new red notebook sat open on the makeup table, its pages filled with 6 years of stories, finally ready to be told. She'd practiced her routine countless times, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just another performance, it was the moment everything changed. The stage manager appeared. "You're on in 10 minutes. Third place presenter just arrived." May nodded, her stomach doing flip-flops. She'd seen the other finalists perform, all of them with years more experience, polished routines, and professional headshots. She looked down at her simple black jacket, chosen to match her old waitress uniform. Under it, she wore her golden walk name tag, not for the audience, but for herself. 5 minutes. She closed her eyes, remembering all the times she practiced in the restaurant's kitchen, using a soup ladle as a microphone. The countless nights at the Rusty Nail, performing for 3 people and a sleeping drunk. The hospital room where her father first asked to hear her jokes. Next up, our final performer of the night. This was it. Mai took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights were brighter than she'd expected, but she could still make out her father's face in the front row. He gave her a small nod, and suddenly she felt steady. "You know," she began, adjusting the microphone. "In Chinese restaurants, we have this thing called family meal. It's when all the staff eat together before the restaurant opens. But in my family, every meal was a performance." The audience leaned in as she launched into her routine, weaving together stories of cultural clashes, customer service nightmares, and family expectations. She told them about the gluten-free lo mein incident, but this time, it wasn't just about an angry customer. It was about finding your voice when the world tries to silence you. "My father used to say, success is like good Chinese cooking. It takes patience, proper timing, and knowing when to turn up the heat." The audience laughed, and she caught her father hiding a proud smile. Each laugh felt like validation, each moan of silence like an opportunity to dig deeper. She wasn't just telling jokes anymore. She was telling her truth, and the audience was right there with her. When she finished, the applause wasn't just polite. It was thunderous. Mr. Liu and the restaurant crew jumped to their feet, starting a standing ovation that spread through the theater like a wave. Her father stood too, slower than the others, but with tears in his eyes. The judges' deliberation felt like hours. Mai sat backstage, surrounded by the other finalists, all of them exchanging nervous smiles. Finally, the moment arrived. In third place. Mai held her breath. With a performance that reminded us why we fell in love with comedy in the first place. She closed her eyes. Mai from the Golden Walk. The cheers from her restaurant family nearly drowned out the rest of the announcement. As she accepted her trophy, something else happened. A well-known touring comedian approached her. "Kid," he said, handing her his card, "how'd you like to open for me on the West Coast tour? Your restaurant stories, that's gold." Later that night, the Golden Walk hosted an impromptu celebration. They'd closed early, pushing tables together in the middle of the restaurant. Mr. Liu brought out special dishes he only made on Chinese New Year. Her father sat at the head of the table, finally looking relaxed. "So," he said in Mandarin, when his first tour show. Mai pulled out her old order pad. She still carried it everywhere. 2 weeks, she replied, already jotting down ideas for new material. "But don't worry, I'll still help with your English homework." Everyone laughed, and in that moment, surrounded by both her families, the one she was born into and the one she'd found, Mai realized something. Sometimes the best punchlines take years to deliver. And sometimes, just sometimes, following your dreams tastes sweeter than any family meal.